to the PowersShift podcast.
Yeah.
Hey, Dad.
Small landmark. This is episode 15.
Mm-hmm.
So we've hung in there for 15 weeks.
Wow, good job, Pops.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ow.
Sorry.
Today, what we want to do is explore the concepts of silence and glimmers. This came out of a couple different conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We talked last week about triggers. So if you didn't catch that, this would be probably a good time to go back and maybe watch that episode.
Another inspiration for this was Darby. After listening to the podcast about triggers, she sent this little thing out on, I think it was Instagram. Mm-hmm. Said, have you ever heard about glimmers, which are the opposite of triggers?
Yeah. Deb Dana is a licensed clinical social worker. She specializes in complex trauma. She wrote a book called The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy.
What does that even mean?
Well, look it up. We should look it up, for real. But she coined the word glimmer in that book, and that was written in 2018. And I'd seen a couple memes about it, but hadn't really gone too far in depth. But it is an awesome spin on the hype word trigger. So we want to get into talking about that, and then we also want to get into talking about silence.
Yeah.
And the relationship between those two.
How that can be a place where you can recognize glimmers. And
well, that's our second inspiration came from Rowan Williams' book called Being Human. Rowan Williams was the Archbishop of Canterbury from 2002 to 2012, I believe. And this book is just packed with a lot. It's short and sweet, but there's a lot of just wisdom and deep thought. And so he has a whole chapter on silence and how that impacts us. So we want to weave through glimmers and silence and see how there's connection with that.
you could probably find him on YouTube as well, because the books were based on talks that he gave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's jump in.
Hilary, how would you define glimmer?
Let's see. When I think of glimmer, I think of like a little spark of light. I almost think of light that dances.
Mm-hmm. In our vocabulary, we talk about, I had a glimmer of hope. Mm-hmm. I had just a glimmer of hope that I could get through that.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, I feel like, short, almost like fleeting moment of light.
Yeah. I mean, and unlike triggers, which bring most often discomfort or pain or some other emotions that are kind of hopeless, I think glimmers can give us pause to see the beauty and joy that's around us if we'll just stop and be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. True, yeah. Deb Dana, in her book, defines glimmers as small moments when our biology is in a place of connection or regulation, which cues our nervous system to feel safe and calm. And that comes up a lot in heart math. We talk a lot in heart math about emotions being renewing or depleting, and how do you create moments of pause to respond versus react. The times I experience glimmers, it's when I'm really tuned in and present in the moment.
So being present, being aware, and then acknowledging it are three things that can help glimmers come into focus.
It's an embodied experience. But we have to, like, for me, it's getting out of my head, because oftentimes if I'm just going about my day, I'll have these check-in moments with myself of like, where am I? And if I'm too much up in here focusing on a conversation I wish I would have, I wish I would have handled differently, or thinking about, the future tripping. It's like, how do I pull myself back in this moment, get out of my head and get in my body? So I'll do check-ins and be like, okay, what am I hearing right now? What is my skin feeling? What am I looking at? And it pulls me into the present moment. And that's whenever I have moments of like, I start hearing things that I wasn't hearing previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our thoughts can be so loud sometimes that it tunes out everything going on around us.
Mm-hmm. With triggers and glimmers, once you can't help what triggers you, and I'm not even sure you can help what glimmers you, but we can learn to acknowledge that, recognize it, and choose it. But I can choose what I do with that trigger or what I do with that glimmer. I think you can appreciate triggers and glimmers because they can both help us grow.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's learning, we've talked about this in almost all of our episodes, is creating new neural pathways. Like we are made to regenerate. If you look at every system in our body, from our taste buds to our skin cells to our stomach lining, we're constantly regenerating and creating new cells.
How about you? What kind of glimmers?
I feel like this is just something I do when I'm driving from place to place, is before I get out of my car, I just take a couple minutes to take a deep breath. And when I got home yesterday, I had worked at an elementary school with a bunch of 4-year-olds, and which is so sweet and also so exhausting. A lot of boogers and a lot of germs.
And hugs that include boogers and germs.
Yeah. I was looking at my clothes and I got home and I was like, what is that? I don't know.
A foreign body.
Yeah. But when I got home yesterday, I could hear the birds before I even turned the car off. And so once I turned it off and opened the door, I just sat there and took that in and just, there was just some sort of peace about that. Yeah. Anytime I hear the birds chirping, when I feel the sun on my face, I feel like that's a literal and figurative glimmer of just like this warmth, and this joy of life. I see it in strangers. I really love those one-off connections you have with a stranger, whether it's silly or it's just sweet, a smile.
I was thinking about that. Us smiling at somebody can be weird, or it can be a glimmer for not only us, but for the other person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And I have so many of those memories imprinted in me of walking through the streets, my old neighborhood in Denver, or in Seattle, walking around there, in Port Angeles. But just these moments, these seconds that go by where you have this recognition of humanity with another person, and you then just go about your day. Airplanes. Yeah. I feel like that's why I love airports so much, is I feel like there's 1,000 million glimmers.
Oh, that's so true. Or it can be, you have to choose it. Yeah. I was thinking the thing that caused glimmers for me this week is, I won't mention their names, but they're both, well, I will mention their names, but I won't mention their last names. 2 Ellies. I call them bookends. You got Ellie on this side and Ellie on this side. But just, they're young. They're both in their early 20s. Just when I see them, or my grandson, or you kids, my children, there are many glimmers in that, because I see the future. It's weird. I can see the future through you guys, and it gives me hope that there is good out there and there are good people. They're intent on making the world a better place. Mm. And it is a true glimmer for me. Yeah.
Well, and I think that you and Mom have done such a good job, just being home this year and seeing, I've just jumped into y'all's world, but I was talking with a friend, and y'all have kind of created this almost like a train station here at the home.
It feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, where you have just different conversations going on, different projects, creations, and you can kind of hop from room to room and see just life happening. And it is like, it was Nikki. She described it as a train station, and it's life is happening and it's not slowing down. But when you have a glimmer, it creates this pause, and for me, it opens my eyes to just reality, I guess. Like, it's like realer than real almost.
Well, what are the components of a glimmer? We know one would be a joy or a hope. What else? I
think of like a spark, so it's almost like this aha moment, like physically when you see a glimmer. You know, I think of, because I do a lot of hiking, so I think of when you see light coming through the trees, and the Japanese have the word komorebi. Have you heard of that word? It literally means the light dancing through the trees. It's
almost like the word wow. Wow. When you're hiking, or you look at you look at El Capitan. Wow. Yeah. It's like an amazement, maybe.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. What else?
In this podcast is just some of the feedback you get, the connection we make with people, and how it's impacting their thoughts is a glimmer for me. Because it helps, it's helping, at least from my perspective, is realize what it is that was in us that wanted to even start this.
I was reflecting on all of this, and that made me think of all our projects over time, back 10 years ago when you and I were making videos, and how this has been a long time coming of us just sitting here and having these conversations. And if anything, no matter where this goes, both of us don't really know. I think it's just, I'm grateful that we're able to capture these moments just between you and I.
If nothing else happens, we've documented these for future generations of our family, which I did with my own father. I have hours of videos where I interviewed him before he died that we go back and look at and laugh, and my grandkids who didn't know him can look at it and get to know him a little bit.
It sort of creates this imprint of time.
Which, kind of a shift here is, so are glimmers just random, or can we create glimmers?
Well, I think the more that we are seeking them and looking out for them, the more we're going to experience them in our physical body and even in our spiritual body and energetic body. But our cells have memories in them. So it's once we start creating that and seeing them, like the more we see it, the more we're going to experience it.
Yeah. What we pay attention to is what we can see and what we notice.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, what we notice, we pay attention to it.
Right.
So it's the same with being positive, being hopeful, being spiritually minded, as far as hope and joy and peace and all that.
Where your attention goes, energy flows, as they say.
Okay, this podcast is over now. That got kind of weird. No.
Yeah, no, that makes me think of like when I see a car I like, and then I start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
That happens all
You're
the time.
beat up. You start seeing beat up. You start seeing beat up Subarus everywhere.
Or you painting on my antiques.
Or I start seeing white trucks with the left blinker out on the back. We're drawing from Being Human by Rowan Williams, and it's his thoughts about silence. So how are we going to connect the dots between glimmers and silence?
So I think that when we're experiencing glimmers or any moment of like profound presence, there is a pause, which to me then indicates that there's some form of silence. And I don't think silence has to be quiet.
And it doesn't have to be long.
Yeah.
It can be a microsecond, millisecond, or it can be 4 hours or whatever. There's that silence is not determined.
It's very fleeting.
Right.
And you and I both have our own practices of silence. I mean, daily, you know, I see you going out on the back porch or in the pergola.
I get up early in the morning and just, it's hard for us. It's hard for me, but as you're talking about this, Hilary, it's making me think about intentionality. Those glimmers can go right by you. You know, something happens, somebody smiles at you and you just, you know, nod or whatever and just go on, not even think about it. When it's really part of this is having awareness about the silence and about the glimmers, being intentional about, I'm going to notice this.
It makes me think of this quote. Can I read it?
Well, I guess you're going to.
When we seek to be truly and fully silent, or let ourselves be silenced by the mystery of God, we become a place where the mystery of God happens.
As I've grown in my own spiritual formation and transformation, those places of silence can be pretty scary, because when that happens, or at least for me, is I'm faced with myself. You have to look at yourself when you really get honest and really get silent there.
That's true. We talked about a few different things, but is there anything else that you can think of that connects being silent and having glimmers?
You can't adjust behaviors if you're not aware that they need to be adjusted. With glimmers, I think you can have an awareness about it, and probably with triggers too, but with glimmers, it's like that you're looking outwardly in your world to the hopeful, positive things that can bring joy.
Yeah, and it is. It's a mindset. I mean, I approach my days when I go out into the world as, you know, I ask myself, what am I feeding the world right now?
Right.
You know, what am I giving away or taking, you know?
That just made me think of the term early on when computers were getting real common, more common. GIGO, G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put stuff in yourself that produces negativity and hopelessness and doubt and fear, more than likely that's what's going to come out. I don't know how that relates to triggers, and it's because sometimes you can't help the garbage that's come in. But you can help what comes out.
Right.
So it's having awareness and a desire, which maybe we'll talk about on another podcast, but you know, desire is really important.
Right.
And what you do with desire. Anyway, we can. Yeah,
I think we are conduits. You know, we allow anything and everything to flow through us, and oftentimes things get lodged and things get stuck, and you know, that's out of our control when we're a little kid. You know, when we're faced with trauma or complex trauma, and then when we start to unpack that, it's like, how do we dislodge some of those emotions and memories that are still stuck in there?
Yeah.
You know?
I like murder mysteries and crime shows and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. You know, people like different books and subjects and all. But how many crime thrillers can you put in yourself without that affecting you in some way in the way you think? You know, Hollywood has determined for a lot of us what our outlook is. And the more I understand about some of the stuff that's happened to women in that environment and men too, but the sexual, you know, stuff that's happened there is, I'm not so sure anymore that I want Hollywood determining how I think.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's how I am with music. When I started down my healing journey, I never went into that thinking that the different kind of music I like was going to be affected.
Right.
But there's some stuff I just can't listen to. Like it literally like hurts my ears to listen to it now, or the words just don't land right. And so it's been interesting to observe myself and see what, when we decide to start paying attention, what really
changes.
Yeah.
We're not talking about being tight-assed. We're talking about being discriminating from the sense of being aware and protective of what you let inside your head, and not only in your head, but in your heart. Mm-hmm. It's not just anything goes. But I think oftentimes we compartmentalize these things in our lives, like our spirituality and our physical life and our work life, when really it's just your life. Mm-hmm. And all those things matter. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we took a little side track there.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about, in Rowan Williams' book, he talks about silence in 3 acts.
The first one would be inarticulate silence, a new word, inarticulacy, which basically, when I read that, means you become silent, and then you have a glimmer, but you can't explain it. You can't put it into words what's going on. Is that how you read that?
Of this first one? Yeah. Well, and what he gets into is the specific moment when someone says, "Oh, just be yourself," mm-hmm. or "Tell me what's on your mind." Oftentimes, if you catch it and pay attention, we have this pause of like, wait, like, who am I? In the book, he quotes a guy who says, the guy says, "Oh, just get it together." And he was like, "I don't know if I have it together."
Right.
Like you're again, what you were saying earlier, you're being met with, who am I? Like face to face with no agenda, hiding nothing. Like, who am I at my core?
We've based everything that we think we are on what we do, mm-hmm. which is not who you are at all.
Right. We talk about that a lot. Human beings versus human doings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're confronted with that complexity of our identity, we're seeing that as an invitation to dive into that.
Beyond what we are or what we can describe with words.
Right. So that can be kind of like a starting point of self-discovery.
Right. That's what Rowan Williams is talking about in there.
What do you think holds us back from jumping into that self-exploration?
Fear.
That's what I thought of too. Yeah.
We listen to those limiting beliefs in our thinking mm-hmm. for so long that maybe we start believing them. Mm-hmm. And so when you get silent, that goes back to what we were talking about. You really face yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's not such a glimmery place. Yeah.
I think of like, people often say like the dark night of the soul.
Yeah. That's in spiritual formation language.
Yeah. Where, again, I reference this period of my life a lot, but that was Port Angeles for me. Yeah. It was 5 years of facing all the parts of myself that I, for so long, stuffed down and did not want to see. Yeah. And they were just screaming and clawing to get out. And how do you open that door and feel like you're going to make it out alive? Because you don't. You feel like you're going to... I felt like I was going to die. And I did. I mean... True. So much of who I thought I was died in those times.
I was thinking of Frodo in Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. It's a whole kind of allegory or metaphor for basically he had to face himself. There was fear, and he was small, and there were giants and every kind of obstacle in his way, but he had hope. And
it was... Again, that glimmer, it's so small.
Yeah.
It's this, it can be smaller than a mustard seed, and that can carry you along.
Sometimes it's so small that we need help from others around us to be able to see.
So let's move on then. So the second way that Rowan talks about silence taking over is in these moments of heavy silence.
Yeah.
So this is the moment he said, quote unquote, the test results are positive.
Yeah.
Like you can insert that with anything, like shocking news, like deep, like tragic, painful suffering.
9/11 is one.
Oh yeah.
I remember I was at work. I was working in Memphis in a distribution center there, and I walked I was out on the floor, and I came back, and I walked by my manager's office, and he was staring at a screen, and I went, "What's going on?" And he turned it, and the plane had just hit the tower, and as we watched, the other plane hit, and it was silence. You were at home with Mom when that happened.
Yeah, she was doing her hair. I remember her being in there, and I turned on the news. I was staying home. I was sick that day. I think I was having period cramps and didn't want to go to school. And I'm watching the news, and I'm like, Mom, you need to come here. Like, it's crazy, the detail. Like, I can just, right now, I can see exactly where the TV was and what happened. And it's mixed with confusion, fear. You're in this moment of suspension, and you can't control it. You can't. There's nothing you can do in those moments.
Yeah.
To change what is happening.
Another one for me, or two other ones for me, was I was 8 years old when President Kennedy got assassinated. There was that profound silence. I mean, people didn't even know how to articulate it or explain it. Another one was when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in Memphis. I remember, where we were, and it was just, we were stunned.
Yeah, and I went to the Civil Rights Museum, to the Lorraine Motel where he was shot.
Well, we went there together on a road trip.
That was on a road trip. And I remember, when you're in a place, like that place, the frequency of that place remembers those moments as well,
Yeah, that's, even now, if you go there, it produces this silence.
That's what I was saying when we went and visited. It's like I felt that there's just this moment of like, there's just a sadness and awe about the whole thing.
Well, how do you think we can see these events that cause this heavy silence as glimmers? Or can we?
I don't know. I don't know if we even can name them. What it makes me think about, too, was watching you and Mom lose your parents.
Oh, yeah.
There was a moment when it was the summer before Grammy died, Mom's mom. And Mom and her were hugging for the last time. And I was in the car, and we were in her driveway, and they were saying goodbye to each other. Oh, it's making me get emotional now. But that moment of like... And you too, like when you and your brothers were shaving your dad's face and he was in the hospital, it's like these moments where it's so raw and so painful, but there's a connection, there's some sort of connection that is happening. Like, and I just remember being like with that situation with Mom and that situation with you, is like, this is going to happen to me. Like, this is going to be something that you and I have to experience. And like...
it's part of living.
Yeah, and it's scary and it's sad, and I remember like me, you, Jordan, and Mom and Dad hiking, and remember that when we were talking about like what it's gonna be like when y'all are gone, and how you can like communicate with me.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, and that's I think. I think it's part of, as I get older, as I realize my own mortality, it's easy to think about the fact that I'll be in 30 years I'll be gone.
Right.
In 3 decades. Okay. You can let that put you in a hole of despair or hopelessness, or you can look at it as an opportunity to invest as much as you can in the people around you.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
When I saw like you and Grandpa or Mom and Grandma, is like the stuff that we were fighting about and the stuff that we were not seeing eye to eye on was just, it's so minuscule compared to just life and wanting to experience y'all in your fullest, not how I think y'all should be or how I want y'all to be, but just like who you are and the essence of who you are. Like, as my parents, you know, I get to experience you as a father, like in this life. You know, I get to experience mom as a mother, and like, what is that? How do I breathe into that and honor that and not let all the shit, which is real shit, like shit that we need to work through. That's hard, you know, but not letting that cloud, just getting to experience you while I can.
But the glimmer, Hilary, for me is, as I think about it, is you being here for the past year. You have honored us. You have worked intentionally toward creating memories and us just doing life together. You know, and us dying is a part of us living. We're only here for 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. Some people will believe that's it. Personally, I don't. I think it's just a stop. And I think this is a school for what is beyond this. Yes, that's weird. I know. I get it. It's weird to me too, but it still doesn't mean that it's not real.
Right. Well, in moments of tragedy, one of my favorite movies is Collateral Beauty with Will Smith. Have you seen that?
I don't think I have.
He, in the movie, he loses his daughter. So he's wrestling with the grief of that. And just how raw and vulnerable it is. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's such a good one. But Collateral Beauty is this concept of how could you ever find beauty in such tragedy? Well, you know, how do you find grief in such horrible, or how do you find a glimmer in such horrible news? And often when you talk to people who have experienced that, they can find, there are moments where it's the kindness of a stranger, or it's literally, you know, that you're connected to something bigger in those moments.
Yeah, for when your sister Bailey would be 35 this year. And when she was in the hospital and they tried to do surgery on her heart, and they put her on the operating table and her heart stopped. They couldn't do the surgery, so they had to, because they'd turn her on her side and her heart would stop beating. So, but what I saw, the glimmers that came from that is one of our friends who had lost his own child 30 years before that, at a time when there was very little sensitivity about the parents and a baby dying at birth, at least where we were. He was able to grieve the loss of his own child. And the surgeon who helped us and worked with us was having relational challenges with his grown son. And for whatever reason, how we interacted with Bailey affected him in relationship to his child. And so those were glimmers that came out of that. Lori, your mom, said that she was here for 13 days, and she was and did everything she was supposed to in that time frame. So it was devastating, but the outcome has been very positive.
Yeah.
It's all how you look at it.
Yeah. Well, and 13 days of life, you know, and I was 3 when that happened, and I was thinking about this because it was just her birthday on the 28th, of like, there's pictures of me with Bailey and all of us at her funeral. We have that stuffed animal, the bunny, that has the pink nose. It smells like cinnamon, and she has the one with the purple nose in her grave. Oh yeah. And I just was thinking of like, my body, my spirit has met her. I got to touch her, but I don't have any conscious memory of that. But it's imprinted in my body, and the way that Bailey has affected my life, yet I have no conscious memory of her, is so enriching. That
is true, positively and negatively, with our own heritage, our families who came before us as Powers, as Kearns, as Lansings. All of this just plays into glimmers, and I would say in terms of glimmers or glimmering, you have to be intentional about seeing those. So it's a choice we make.
Yeah.
We have to decide it and choose it.
Yeah. Well, let's briefly talk about the third one that Rowan discusses about transformative silence. So this is the moment of silence when, gosh, and I've experienced this so many amazing times, but right after a really good concert, there's this like pause right before everyone starts applauding.
Yeah.
Or a play or whatever, but there's just so much packed into that little pause where it's just like you can't absorb it enough. I feel like you're so connected with those around you, with the music, with yourself, with something bigger, and it leaves you in awe. I think of the concerts I went to go see at Red Rocks, or all the times I saw Elephant Revival, one of my favorite bands. Like, you just walk out of these places and you're on a high.
Yeah, that's true. My brother and I, Ty, took me to a U2 concert. When you walk out of there, you're going, wow. Because you can listen to them on the radio or on Spotify all day long, but when you go there and you're in those moments, I think another one was watching you jump out of an airplane.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Or us hiking and and being able to achieve some of those things. For me, it's also when you learn something. When I've learned something in my spiritual journey or whatever, or I read some profound thing like what Rowan Williams is saying or Dallas Willard, you finish that book and you go, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever, sometimes I'll be reading certain things and it literally feels like the author is like pulling those words from your soul. Like, do you know what I mean?
Nope. I don't.
There's been a few books I've read where thanks, Dad. As I was reading each of those words, I was like, I've heard this before, I've felt it before. And it does give you kind of this moment to like take a deep breath and be like, whoa. Are there any other places that you can think of when you have felt that silence before something really joyous or beautiful?
Having you kids. When the doctor said, how many did you want? I'm going, what do you mean? Well, I hear 3 heartbeats. Oh, wait, no, it's 2. The silence that came after that for Mom and me was, Mom had wanted twins her whole life. I was going, I don't really care. I just want them to be healthy. When they said, I was like, the silence was, your life has just changed as you know it.
Yeah.
And it did. I remember that day I was quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that applies. But.
Yeah, no, I don't have kids myself yet, but I can only imagine that kind of love. I mean, the closest person I have to that would be Hayden, my nephew, but I remember having my ear up to the door in the hospital when Haley was giving birth and just hearing his first little cry and just as a 16-year-old feeling something like that, you're just like, this is crazy.
It kind of moves you.
I think that's why I like being outside so much is nature just is packed full of glimmers and moments of like deep, just like reveration and
even just
reveration.
Another new word. Well, and even as we walked the other day in that mountain bike park, as you trudge along, you can kind of go to this place of contemplation, reflection, silence. Mm-hmm. But I think the silence, too, gives us a space to be moved. Mm-hmm. It's a place where that pause you're talking about, things can sink in if you pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. And it's practicing and learning how to let that pause be there. That's why in coaching it's very important for the coach to talk less and let there be and get comfortable with the space. Mm-hmm. I'm still learning that, is don't fill the space up with words and thoughts and stuff. let that silence be there.
Well, actually, that makes me think of our whole concept talking last week of striking a chord, and how we're all these instruments. And when you're, let's say you're in a coaching call, someone's just tuning, right?
Yeah.
There's tuning and bam, 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 bam. You're having to play that same string over and over again.
Right.
But there's this resonation or there's this resonance or this dissonance that is happening. And again, you're creating that space to let that person tune themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about ways that we can seek out these glimmers or these moments of silence, Dana had a good quote from her book that I wanted to share. And she says, what we've discovered is, as you begin to see a glimmer, you begin to look for more. It's just what we do, and we then delight in finding them.
Yeah.
That's your nervous system beginning to shape towards the patterns of connection that are inherently waiting in there to be deepened and brought alive.
I just thought of an Easter egg hunt. The eggs are glimmers. You go looking for them. You can find them. Another thing too, Hilary, before we get into this, how to seek them out, is a glimmer for me today was when you got emotional about our lives. That is a glimmer. I love that you are that sensitive about it, and that it makes you cry. And and we could go way off into what it is. Does it make you happy? Does it make you sad? But that's a glimmer for me. We could overlook that, but it's important to recognize those. When they make us emotional, and most of the time they do, it's embracing those emotions in those moments of glimmers. So,
and I think, as I am on my journey, I am learning how to hold space for deep sadness and deep joy, like simultaneously. Like that's really hard. Like I have these moments, during prayer, or before church, or I meditate when I wake up, and I will just be like sobbing, and it's just like this flow of tears that are coming from a deeper well. I can't really explain it, but
healing tears.
It's so healing. Like when I cry and release, like I feel like I'm getting cleansed from the inside out.
And that's important, because wasn't there a time in your life where crying was very hard?
Oh yeah, like I
didn't do it.
I didn't cry.
Yeah.
And that was years of just stuffing down. As a kid, I cried all the time, and then I started stuffing that down. And it actually wasn't until a traumatic event where I started going to therapy that I discovered, one, that I was stuffing down those tears and that sadness, and I was replacing it with anger or resentment, and I had to start unpacking that. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing there too is there isn't this defined thing about glimmers. It's just, there's not one definition of that. As you've gotten into therapy, it's created a space where you can see the glimmers. It's given you a lens to see that everything doesn't just trigger you in a negative way. In fact, some of the things that we've thought of as triggers can actually be glimmers too.
Yeah.
What starts as a trigger or a negative thing can be transformative, and then it creates a glimmer. So how can we train ourselves to seek out glimmers in our everyday lives?
Well, what we've been saying is we need to slow down.
Yeah.
We need to, for me, a big thing is connecting to place. We are so disconnected from our environment. Just look at the world, look at how we're treating the earth.
Yeah.
And when we connect to place, something happens in us, deep in us, that I think opens the landscape to more of those glimmers. I think of that when I camp or when I hike. I like to watch sunrises and sunsets or go stargazing. That's stargazing, probably one of my favorite things in life. But when we connect to the place that we're in and we pay attention and we're slowing down, we start to see those glimmers.
So I in my notes I put what you just said, but slow down. These are all actions Slow down, notice the details of your life, appreciate them, connect with them in some way, cultivate a mindset that looks for light. All those things are things that we can practice. So slowing down, noticing, appreciating, connecting, and cultivating are things that we can do to start noticing glimmers, like the author of the book you were talking about said.
Yeah, I think it's having this heart posture of expectantly waiting when we're pausing or we're slowing things down, or waiting
or silence.
Like sometimes we think of those as passive, and they're not. They're active.
Yeah, that's true. That's another thing we can add to that. Actively is enjoying the process of learning how to see glimmers. What are your 3 takeaways?
My 3 takeaways. I love you.
Yes.
I'm glad that I'm doing this with you.
Same. I love you too.
Thanks, Ed. I would say my second one would just finding ways to seek out light and the goodness. Oftentimes I think sometimes I feel this, so I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I'll feel moments of guilt for feeling so happy or so joyous when I look at the world and the state that we're in. When I think about what's going on in Gaza and in the Middle East, like when I think about what's happening downtown Jackson, which is really, can be a really dangerous place. Like so many people's lives around us are being destroyed as we speak, and so sometimes I feel this guilt of feeling the joy and the happiness. And
so what's the takeaway from that?
So the takeaway that it's okay to feel joy.
Right.
That just because you're feeling happiness or joy or seeing glimmers doesn't mean that you're this numbed out idealist who, can't relate to can't relate to the sadness and the pain in the world as well. Yeah. That's true. My third one would just be to breathe. I think we say that a lot, but when I take deep breaths, there's a shift in my body physiologically and in my spirit, and I think it allows for more of these moments of light to shine through.
Very important. Yeah.
What about you? What are your 3 takeaways?
My 3 takeaways would be 1, slow down, intentionally notice what's going on around you, the small details, and cultivate a mindset that looks for light, even in times that seem dark.
Yeah, that's good. I love that. So thanks, y'all, for tuning in. Have a beautiful week. Let us know what you think and feel about Glimmers in Silence.
Yeah.
And we love you.
Yes, we do.